Show more 4:05 a.m. She was 9 years old, soaking wet, and standing at the door of a man who had made senators cry. In her hand, a crumpled $5 bill. In her chest, something no amount of power or money has ever been able to manufacture. The kind of love that doesn't calculate the odds before it moves. The rain over Seoul that Tuesday night was the kind that doesn't just fall, it commits. It had been committing for 3 days straight, as though the sky had a personal grievance with the city and intended to settle it thoroughly. The Han River had swollen past its polite boundaries. The streets of Gangnam gleamed like black mirrors, reflecting the cold luxury of towers that touched clouds most people would never be allowed to stand inside. Amara Johnson stood at the entrance of one such tower, looking up. She was 9 years old, Nigerian-American, with box braids her mother had spent 4 hours doing the previous Saturday, and a cardigan that had a small embroidered strawberry just above the left pocket. The cardigan was her favorite. She had worn it deliberately tonight, the way soldiers wear their medals before battle. Not for vanity, but for confidence. For the reminder of who they were before the fight started. The $5 bill in her hand was soft from being gripped too long. It was American money, left over from their last trip to Lagos to visit Grandma Folake, who pressed American bills into the twins' palms every visit because she believed American money carried a different quality of luck. Amara had found it wedged deep in the sofa cushions 45 minutes ago, at the exact moment she shifted from worried to operational. She was not, by nature, a child who panicked. Panic was Zara's contribution to their partnership. Amara planned. Amara observed. Amara had once, at age 7, negotiated a longer bedtime with their mother using a 3-point argument about circadian rhythms she had read about in a National Geographic, and she had won. Their mother, Dr. Yemi Johnson, a Nigerian-American virologist with 2 PhDs and 0 patience for nonsense, had stood in the hallway afterward looking at her daughter with the specific expression of someone who has created something they didn't fully anticipate. Zara, her twin, was the other kind of person entirely. Zara followed cats, which is precisely how this night had happened. It had been Sir Biscuit's fault, technically. Sir Biscuit was a gray, one-eared stray who prowled the back lanes behind Mapogu Market with the supreme confidence of someone who owned the neighborhood without paying rent. Zara had spotted him from their apartment window at 7:43 p.m., and in the time it took Amara to look up from her book and say, "Zara, don't," Zara had already put on her shoes. She had followed the cat through 3 alleyways, past 2 Pojangmaka stalls, and directly into the operational staging area of Seo Byung-chul, a mid-level criminal whose primary business was counterfeit luxury goods and whose primary personality trait was paranoia. A 9-year-old girl materializing in the middle of his 9 p.m. inventory operation was not, by any stretch, something his contingency planning had covered. He locked her in a storage room. Sir Biscuit, for his part, exited through a gap in the corrugated wall and was never seen in that district again, which is simply what cats do when they have finished being the instrument of fate. Amara had pieced all of this together from the window, from memory, from a conversation she had overheard 3 weeks ago between the building's security guard, Mr. O, and a colleague. "Nobody moves in that warehouse district without Kwon knowing," Mr. O had said. "The man owns the air down there." Amara had filed that information. Tonight, she withdrew it. She crossed the marble lobby. She rode the elevator to the 42nd floor. She walked down a hallway that smelled of expensive cologne and something colder, authority, maybe, or consequence, and she knocked on the door at the end of it. 3 seconds later, it opened. Kwon Jae-won was tall in the way that buildings are tall, not just physically, but structurally, as though the space around him reorganized itself to accommodate his presence. He had a neck tattoo that curled behind his left ear, a diamond stud in that same ear, and the kind of face that had stopped being surprised by the world approximately 20 years ago. He had not, however, stopped being surprised by everything. Amara held up the $5. "I need to hire you," she said. "My sister is in the warehouse district. Bad men took her. I was told you keep your deals." She paused, then added, with the precision of someone who had rehearsed the closing argument on the elevator ride up. "So, I'm making one." The hallway was very quiet. Somewhere behind Kwon, a man named Do Hyun forgot to close his mouth. Kwon Jae-won looked at the $5 bill, at the small, rain-damp face above the strawberry cardigan. at the absolute, architectural certainty in this child's eyes, not hope, not pleading, but certainty that she had found the right door, made the right calculation, and that the rest was simply logistics. He reached out. He took the money. And if you've ever doubted that love, in its purest and most fearless form, is the most powerful currency in any room, here is your evidence. Here is a 9-year-old girl who walked into the fortress of the most dangerous man in Seoul with $5 and the unshakable conviction that her sister was worth every impossible step of it. Comment Amara below if you believe that kind of love is real, and if you would have had the courage to knock on that door. And if you're not siding with Seo Byung-chul, the man who thought locking up a child was a reasonable Tuesday evening decision, hit that like button. Cowards and bullies won't. The convoy was moving in 4 minutes. The 42nd floor emptied like a held breath finally released. 12 men in dark suits moved with the quiet efficiency of people who had rehearsed urgency so many times it had become a resting state. Car keys appeared. Earpieces were fitted. Jackets were straightened with the mechanical precision of men who understood that looking correct was part of the function. Do Hyun, who had finally closed his mouth, was already on his phone, pulling warehouse district schematics from a contact who owed Kwon 17 different favors and was always very prompt about repaying them. Amara stood in the center of the penthouse living room and watched all of this happen. She had been told to sit. She had nodded at the instruction and then remained standing, because sitting felt like something you did when you were waiting for news, and Amara had not come here to wait for news. She had come here to produce results. There was a distinction, and she felt it was important to physically represent it. The penthouse was extraordinary. Black marble floors that reflected the ceiling lights like still water. Floor-to-ceiling windows showing Seoul spread below in its nighttime architecture, a city that never fully darkened, only shifted registers, from the white light of offices to the amber glow of streets to the cold blue of towers like this one. A living room furnished with the specific minimalism of someone who could afford to own everything and had chosen instead to own only what was necessary and to make sure everything necessary was perfect. On the glass coffee table, abandoned, was Kwon's whiskey. He had not gone back for it. Amara noted this and filed it in the part of her brain that tracked meaningful details. A man who abandons his drink to move immediately is a man who has already decided the drink is not the priority. This told her something. She wasn't entirely sure what yet, but she kept it. Do Hyun approached her. He was a compact man in his mid-30s, with a kind of face that was professionally neutral, designed, through long practice, to reveal nothing. He crouched to her level in a way that was respectful rather than condescending, which Amara appreciated and also noted. You said the warehouse district, he said. Can you be more specific? Mapogu. Behind the market. There's a gray cat in that area, one ear. My sister followed it. She paused. The cat won't still be there. But the alley it came from runs behind a building with a green corrugated roof. I saw the roof on Google Maps before I came here. Do Hyun stared at her for exactly 2 seconds longer than he intended to. Then he stood, turned, and relayed this information into his earpiece with the tone of a man who had learned tonight that 9-year-olds were, in certain cases, better intelligence assets than trained operatives. Amara pulled her cardigan tighter and looked out the window at Seoul. Somewhere down there, in one of those amber pockets of light, Zara was locked in a room. Zara, who was afraid of the dark but would never admit it. Zara, who slept with a small nightlight shaped like a crescent moon that their mother had bought her in Lagos. Zara, who had followed a cat into the worst Tuesday of her life. Amara felt something move in her chest. Not panic. She had already had her 30 seconds of panic back in the apartment, crouched on the kitchen floor with her hands pressed to her face, before she stood up, breathed, and converted the panic into a plan. What she felt now was different. Older. Heavier. It was the feeling of understanding, for the first time with real clarity, that the person you love most in the world is somewhere you cannot reach without help. That you have done everything you can from your side, and now you have to trust that the thing you set in motion is going to hold. It was, she would understand later when she was old enough to have the vocabulary for it, the specific loneliness of loving someone. She did not cry. She breathed instead, slowly, deliberately, the way Dr. Yemi Johnson had taught both girls to breathe when things became large. 4 counts in, hold 4, 4 counts out. Their mother had learned it from a cardiologist colleague and adapted it for 2 daughters who had, from birth, regularly produced situations that required cardiovascular management. Kwon Jae-won appeared at the edge of the room. He had his jacket on now, buttoned, and looked like a man about to attend an event that would be unpleasant for everyone except himself. He looked at Amara. She looked at him. "You're not going to stay here," he said. It was not a question. He had, apparently, already assessed her correctly. "No," she confirmed. Something moved briefly at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile. More the shadow of one. The outline of an expression that had once been familiar and now appeared only in certain unusual conditions. He gestured toward the elevator with 2 fingers. "Stay behind my men," he said. "At all times. You do not move unless I or Do-hyun tell you to move." "Understood." Amara considered the terms. They were reasonable. She nodded. "And," he added, pausing in a way that suggested what was coming was an afterthought but was not an afterthought at all, "put this on." He produced, from somewhere that Amara could not identify because it seemed to simply materialize, a very large dark jacket. It was approximately 4 times her size. It smelled of cedar and something cold, like winter air. She put it on. The sleeves covered her hands entirely. The hem reached her shins. Do-hyun, behind them, looked away. He was possibly controlling his face. It was difficult to tell. The elevator descended in silence. Amara stood between Kwon Jae-won and the elevator wall, invisible inside the enormous jacket, her box braids slightly damp, her strawberry cardigan buried underneath all that authority, and she thought about Zara, and she thought about Sir Biscuit, and she thought about the $5 bill that was now in the front pocket of the most dangerous man in Seoul. She thought, this is going to work. Not because she was certain, but because she had decided it would, and in Amara Johnson's experience, the decision always preceded the outcome. Their mother had told her that once. The world responds to people who have already made up their minds. Dr. Yemi Johnson had said it about scientific research, but Amara had always understood it was about everything. Outside, the convoy of black cars waited in the rain. The lead driver, a large, quiet man named Tae-sik, who had been with Kwon for 11 years and prided himself on having seen everything, opened the rear door and found himself looking down at a small girl in a jacket 8 sizes too large. He looked at Kwon. Kwon looked at Tae-sik with an expression that said, "Drive the car." Tae-sik drove the car. They moved through Seoul's wet streets like a dark ribbon unspooling through silk, smooth, deliberate, absolute. Amara sat in the back seat between empty space and the window, watching the city pass. The rain made everything impressionist through the glass. She pressed one hand flat against the cold window, not for warmth, just for contact. Proof that the world outside was real and moving, and that she was moving through it toward her sister. Kwon sat on her other side, phone to his ear, speaking in low Korean that she only partially followed. Her Korean was functional, not fluent, built from 9 months of living in Seoul and the specific vocabulary that 2 9-year-olds acquire fastest, which is food words and insult words and the phrases their mother used when she was tired. She caught warehouse and how many and something that sounded like a number. He ended the call. Silence for 2 seconds. "Your sister," he said, without looking away from the window. "What is she like?" Amara considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. "She follows cats," Amara said. Kwon Jae-won said nothing. But the shadow of that almost smile appeared again, briefly, and this time it stayed half a second longer before it left. The convoy turned south toward Mapogu, toward the warehouse district, toward a green corrugated roof and a locked storage room, and a 9-year-old girl who had, by this point, taught 2 of her captors a clapping game, and was now attempting to explain the rules of a card game she was inventing in real time. Zara Johnson, it must be noted, was also not panicking. She was, however, very hungry, and she had made this known to everyone in the building at regular intervals, with the patient persistence of someone who understood that repetition was a legitimate negotiation strategy. She would be getting jollof rice within the hour. She just didn't know yet that it was her 9-year-old twin, a $5 bill, and the most feared man in Seoul who were going to make that happen. The green corrugated roof was exactly where Amara said it would be. Tae-sik killed the headlights 2 blocks out. The convoy stopped. Doors opened and closed with the quiet precision of people who understood that sound was information, and that information, in the wrong ears, was a liability. 8 men fanned into the darkness without instruction, moving the way water moves around obstacles. Naturally, inevitably, without announcing themselves. Kwon stood beside the car and looked at the building. His face was unreadable in the way that deep water is unreadable, not because there is nothing beneath the surface, but because the surface gives nothing away. Amara stood beside him. "I told you to stay in the car," he said. "You told me to stay behind your men," she corrected precisely. "I am behind your men. All of them are in front of me." Do-hyun, 3 feet away, developed a sudden intense interest in his earpiece. Kwon looked down at her. The enormous jacket. The box braids. The expression of someone who had found a technicality and intended to live inside it permanently. He pointed to a spot directly behind him.
"Here," he said.
"You stand here. You do not move from this exact point. If you move from this point, I will be very displeased." Amara moved to the exact point. She planted her feet. The operation took 11 minutes. She heard very little, controlled sounds, brief voices, something that she categorized as a scuffle, and then silence. She watched the building's single-lit window go dark, then light again. She watched Do-hyun receive information through his earpiece, nod, and relay something quietly into his phone. She did not move from the point. Then the side door of the warehouse opened, and Zara walked out. She was not crying. She was not visibly distressed. She was, in fact, mid-sentence, finishing something she had apparently been saying to the operative escorting her, who had the expression of a man who had expected to rescue someone and had instead been recruited into a conversation. "And that's why the second rule of the card game is the most important one," Zara was saying, "because without it the whole thing collapses." She looked up. Across the wet concrete, through the rain, her eyes found Amara's. Everything stopped. The operatives. The rain, somehow. The whole heavy machinery of the night. It all stopped, and there were just 2 9-year-old girls looking at each other across 30 feet of darkness. Then Zara ran. Amara ran. They collided in the middle with the force of children who have loved each other since before they had words for it, since before they had anything but shared warmth and the sound of each other's heartbeat through a womb wall. Zara was shaking. She was pretending not to be, but Amara felt it, and she held tighter. Zara pressed her face into the strawberry cardigan, into the enormous jacket that swallowed them both, and breathed. "I named the cat Sir Biscuit," Zara said, into Amara's shoulder. "I know," Amara said. "He left me. Cats do that. I was going to share my dinner with him. He didn't deserve it." Zara laughed. A wet, fractured sound that was also relief, that was also love, that was also 9 years of being the reckless one and always being found. Behind them, 12 men in dark suits stood in the rain and looked at various neutral points in the middle distance, because some moments don't belong to anyone who is watching. They only belong to the people inside them. Kwon Jae-won had seen many things in his 41 years. He had seen men who controlled ports weep like children when their leverage evaporated. He had seen governments negotiate in rooms that officially did not exist. He had once watched a very senior judge attempt to bribe him with a vacation property in Jeju Island, as though Kwon did not already own 3 things on Jeju Island, one of which was a better view. He had not seen anything like this. The 2 girls stood in the rain, locked together, completely indifferent to the 12 armed men surrounding them, indifferent to the warehouse, indifferent to Seoul and its cold Tuesday and its 3 days of committed rainfall. They existed, in that moment, entirely inside each other. The rest of the world was simply weather. Something moved in Kwon Jae-won's chest. He did not immediately identify it because it had been dormant long enough that it had become unfamiliar. It took him several seconds to recognize it as tenderness, real tenderness, unperformed, unstrategic. The kind that arrives without asking permission and leaves fingerprints on things you thought were sealed. He looked away. Toward the building, where Do-hyun was managing the administrative consequences of the evening, Seo Byung-chul zip-tied to a structural column, 11 associates similarly arranged, a phone call being made to a contact at the district police office who would file a report worded with magnificent vagueness. Seo had not, to his credit, pretended he didn't know what he'd done wrong. Operating inside Kwon territory, without permission, was the kind of error that required no explanation once Kwan's men arrived. The explanation was the arrival. What Seo had not anticipated, what none of them had anticipated, including Kwan himself, 40 minutes ago in his penthouse, was that his recklessness would be answered not by a calculated syndicate response, but by a 9-year-old girl in a strawberry cardigan with $5 and the negotiating confidence of a maritime lawyer. History, Kwan reflected, had a sense of humor. Do Hyun appeared at his shoulder. "It's clean," he said quietly. "Seo's people won't talk. The others have been released." A pause. The girl apparently taught 2 of Seo's men a clapping game. They seemed genuinely disappointed when our people arrived. Kwan said nothing. She also, Do Hyun continued, with the careful tone of someone delivering information they find personally destabilizing, invented a card game during her time in the storage room. She tried to explain the rules to Tae-sik on the way out. He says they were surprisingly coherent. Kwan looked at Zara, still folded into her sister. Then at Amara, who was holding Zara with the focused intensity of someone who had set a goal, achieved it, and was now in the process of verifying the result thoroughly. He walked toward them, slowly, in the way you approach something you don't want to disturb, not because it is fragile, but because it is complete, and completion deserves respect. He crouched down. Amara looked up first. Her eyes were dry. Zara's were not, though she was working on it. "Deal complete," Kwan said. Amara nodded. Then, with the efficiency of someone who had been planning this moment for the entire car ride, she reached into her pocket and produced 3 coins and a slightly flattened candy wrapped in gold foil. "Interest," she said, "for fast service." He looked at the coins, at the candy, at this 9-year-old who had walked into his fortress and reordered his entire evening without once doubting that she should. He took the coins. He left the candy. A man had to have standards. He stood, straightened his jacket, and spoke quietly into the night. Standing order. Nobody touches those 2 girls. Any district. Forever. Dr. Yemi Johnson discovered her daughters were missing at 9:47 p.m. She had been in her university laboratory until 9, running a protein analysis that had required her full attention and the specific tunnel vision that serious science demands. She had texted the twins at 7. Amara had replied, "We're fine, doing homework," with the punctuation and composure of a child who was, at that exact moment, probably already formulating a plan that would have made her mother's cardiologist colleague deeply concerned. Yemi had stopped for groceries. She had taken the elevator up. She had called out both names the moment she opened the apartment door, the way parents do. Not because they expect silence, but because the sound of their child's voice answering is a small, daily confirmation that the world is still correctly arranged. Silence answered. She checked both rooms. The bathroom. The kitchen. She found Amara's book open and face down on the sofa, which meant Amara had left in a hurry, because Amara never put a book down without marking her page, not once in 9 years, not even during a fire drill. She found Zara's shoes gone. She found, wedged between the sofa cushions, nothing, because Amara had already found what was there and spent it. Dr. Yemi Johnson stood in her living room for exactly 8 seconds. Then she became a woman in motion. She called Amara's phone. Voicemail. She called Zara's. Voicemail. She called the building's front desk, the security office, Mr. O, who answered on the 4th ring sounding sleepy and became very awake very quickly when he understood what he was being asked. She was pulling on her coat and her keys simultaneously, which is a skill that only parents of twins develop because twins regularly require both hands and both halves of your brain to be doing different things at the same time. She was in the elevator when her phone rang. Unknown number. Seoul area code. She answered before the first ring finished. Dr. Johnson. The voice was male, low, and carried the particular quality of someone accustomed to being listened to. Your daughters are safe. They are with me. I am bringing them home. Yemi's hand tightened on the phone. Every instinct she possessed, scientific, maternal, and the specifically Nigerian instinct that assumes any unexpected call at 10 p.m. is the opening move of a disaster, fired simultaneously. Who is this? She said. Her voice was steady. It was the voice she used in funding meetings with difficult committee chairs. It was a voice that had been trained over many years to project control even when control was precisely what the situation had removed. A pause. Someone your daughter hired, the voice said. Yemi closed her eyes for 2 seconds. Amara, she thought, in the tone that was not quite anger and not quite awe, but lived exactly in the neighborhood between them. The tone she had been using approximately once a week since Amara was 5 years old and had reorganized the kitchen cupboards by frequency of use and presented her findings in a handwritten chart. I'm coming to you, Yemi said. We are already coming to you, the voice said. 10 minutes. The call ended. Yemi stood in the lobby of her building in her coat with her keys still in her hand, and she breathed 4 counts in, hold 4 counts out, and she waited. The convoy arrived in 9 minutes. She was watching from the building entrance when the black cars turned into the street, and she was already moving toward the second car when the door opened and Zara spilled out first, and the sight of her daughter, slightly disheveled, completely alive, wearing an expression that was equal parts sheepish and unrepentant, did something to Yemi's chest that no medical degree had ever adequately prepared her for. She caught Zara and held her, and then Amara was there too, still wearing an enormous dark jacket that reached her shins, and Yemi held them both and said nothing because there was nothing that language was built to carry in that moment. Some things exist before words. Some things exist after them. A mother holding her children in the rain is both. She looked up. Kwon Jae-won stood a respectful distance away, hands in his pockets, watching with the expression of a man who has completed a transaction and is now observing the receipt being confirmed. He was not performing disinterest. He was simply giving her space, which told her something immediate and specific about him. Yemi straightened. She was 5'4", in a raincoat, holding a grocery bag in one hand, and she walked toward this man with the bearing of someone who stood 6 feet tall. My daughter hired you, she said. She did, he said. With $5. The terms were acceptable. Yemi looked at him for a long moment. At the tattoos, the earring, the expensive suit absorbing the rain, without complaint. At the 12 men behind him, the convoy, the general infrastructure of a person around whom the world rearranged itself. Then she looked back at Amara. Amara, who had found this man, climbed to his floor, made a deal, ridden in his convoy, navigated an active criminal operation, and stood her ground on a precise point in a dark warehouse yard, all for the love of a twin sister who had followed a one-eared cat into a Tuesday catastrophe. Yemi looked back at Kwon. Thank you, she said. Simply, completely, without qualification. Something shifted in his expression, not much, but enough. The way a window shifts when someone opens it just slightly, just enough to let something in from outside. He nodded once. Your daughters, he said quietly, with what sounded almost like genuine conviction, are remarkable. Yemi glanced back at her girls. Amara already explaining something to Zara with her hands. Zara already arguing back. Both of them rain-damp and alive and entirely themselves. I know, she said. They get it from somewhere. She said it without arrogance. Just fact. The same way she stated research conclusions, plainly because the data was clear. And if Kwon Jae-won, walking back to his car, permitted himself one full smile, not the shadow, not the outline, but the real thing, brief and unguarded, aimed at no one in particular and the rainy Seoul Street in general, then only Do Hyun saw it. Do Hyun, professionally, saw nothing. 3 weeks later, a package arrived at the Johnson apartment. No return address. Seoul postmark. Wrapped in plain brown paper with both their names written on the front in precise, angular handwriting. Amara and Zara Johnson. The kind of handwriting that has never been casual a day in its life. Zara shook it. Amara stopped her. They opened it together, which was the only correct way to open anything in the Johnson household, a rule established by Zara at age 5 and never successfully repealed. Inside was a small wooden box. Inside the box were 2 things. The first was a $5 bill, crisp, unfolded, new, with a single line written on a card beneath it in the same angular handwriting. Interest. For a deal well made. The second was a deck of cards. Handmade. 52 cards, hand-illustrated in clean black ink, with rules printed on the inside of the box lid in neat Korean and English. The game had a name, written on the top card in careful block letters. Sir Biscuit's Game. Zara made a sound that she would later categorize as not crying, but which fooled absolutely nobody, including herself. Amara read the rules twice. They were surprisingly coherent. Built, she realized slowly, from the game Zara had invented in the storage room, reconstructed from what Zara had apparently explained to Taesik in the car, who had relayed it to Do-hyun, who had relayed it to Kwon, who had done this. She sat with that knowledge for a long moment. Then she got a piece of paper and wrote a letter. 1 page, front only, no wasted words. She thanked him for the deal. She told him the deck was perfect. She told him that Sir Biscuit had actually reappeared outside their building the previous Thursday, eaten a piece of Zara's jollof rice, and left again, without acknowledgement. She signed it, Amara Johnson. Age 9. Your most affordable client. She sent it to the 42nd floor. 2 days later, a reply arrived. 1 line. The cat has good taste. KJW. Dr. Yemi Johnson read the entire exchange over Amara's shoulder, said nothing for a long time, and then went to her room and laughed for approximately 4 minutes in a way she did not fully explain to either daughter. In Seoul's underworld, the standing order held. It would hold for years, long after the twins outgrew box braids and strawberry cardigans, long after they left for university, long after the whole Extraordinary Tuesday became the story the Johnson family told at every gathering while Zara embellished and Amara corrected the embellishments with her eyes closed. The $5 bill stayed framed. Yemi hung it in the hallway between 2 photographs, one of Lagos, one of Seoul. Both daughters walked past it every day. Neither ever needed to be reminded what it meant. If you believe that love is the most powerful currency in any room, like, subscribe and comment Amara below. Only people siding with Seo Byung-chul won't.